Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. This week we've got the case of Zebb Quinn, which is probably one that you have heard of. It's one of those strange cases with so many little odd details that the media really picked up on it, and so did all the different online communities. It was unsolved for so many years, but about a year and a half ago an arrest was actually made, and I didn't realise this. I just thought I'd give the case a Google a couple of weeks ago, see if there had been any developments in it, and it turned out that somebody had been arrested. So although this case is, I suppose, technically now a solved case, there are still so many unanswered questions in it that I don't even think it can be called a solved case. So Zebb Quinn was a young man at just 18 years old when he went missing from Asheville, North Carolina on the 2nd of January 2000, and the circumstances of his disappearance are very, very strange. Zebb attended the local community college or the local high school, depending on which source you believe, and he was actually enrolled in the ROTC program with his high school or college, and he really, really enjoyed it. It was his favourite thing to do alongside fishing. And his mum has actually speculated that Zebb always struggled to make friends due to a learning disability that he had, which sort of gave him a bit of a disadvantage in social situations. So Zebb wasn't the most popular guy in the world. He didn't have loads and loads of friends, but he seemed more than happy with his own company. And don't get me wrong, he did have friends, but he just wasn't the most socially adept person. He was of an average height and weight. He was about 5'9" to 5'10" and weighed about 75 kilograms. Now I just want to say here before we really get into this case that the facts on this one are a little bit dodgy. Every single source you read or documentary you watch, everything's always just slightly different, slightly off. So I've tried my best to piece together the facts as much as I can, but I just want to make you aware there are some things that are different in every different source. So I have tried my best, but just bear that in mind when I'm telling you. So apparently on the 2nd of January 2000, Zebb left his shift at Walmart in Asheville. He'd worked at Walmart for quite a while. He worked in the electronics department, and he left work that night around 9 PM, and he went to meet his friend and co-worker Robert Jason Owens in the car park. Now Robert is actually often referred to as Jason in some sources, in others he is called Robert. I'm going to call him Robert because it seems like that was his actual first name. But yeah, he might be called Jason in other places. But Robert was one of Zebb's very few friends. The two got on quite well. Robert worked at Walmart and had another job as well. That's where they'd met. And the two would play pool together occasionally. The two had plans that night to go to the nearby town of Leicester, where Robert was going to help Zebb look at some new cars that he wanted to buy. So they both set off for Leicester, and they actually head off in their separate cars. They're sort of just following each other. They stop at a petrol station to buy some drinks, and this is the last time that we know for certain that Zebb was alive. This is the last time he's ever been seen on camera or by another person. And then the journey, they carry on driving, and then the journey just comes to a sudden halt where Zebb is driving and suddenly signals over to Robert that he needs to pull over, and so the two pull over at the side of the road. Zebb gets out of his car and says to Robert that he's got a page and he just needs to go to a payphone and return this page. So he goes to the nearest payphone and talks to somebody. After the phone call, Zebb returns back to the cars where Robert is waiting for him, and Robert said that Zebb was in a really frantic state at this point. And now it's worth bearing in mind that all of the information from them leaving the Walmart car park up until this point where Zebb is just in a really frantic state is just all from Robert's point of view. So this is just what Robert has been saying. He was definitely the last person to see him alive, but there's nobody else's story to back up what Robert is saying. You've just got to take it at face value. So Zebb, who is obviously in a huge hurry at this point, he's just really frantic, gets in his car and goes to drive off, but whilst he's in this state, he accidentally reverses and hits Robert's car, and then he just speeds off. Interestingly, hours later, Robert actually appears at the local hospital where he needs to be treated for broken ribs and a head injury. And he tells staff at the hospital that he's actually got his injuries in a car accident, but not a car accident from Zebb hitting his car. That was just a little rear end. It didn't hurt Robert in any way. But apparently that night Robert got into a second car accident. He said that he was pulling out of a Waffle House and he got hit by a car. Interestingly, there was no accident or insurance report ever filed for either of these two crashes. But Robert definitely got hurt somehow because he did go to hospital with these injuries. And Zebb didn't return home that night. His mum Denise said that Zebb was really good at keeping in contact with her. He was 18 years old, so he was an adult, so he didn't have to check in with her and tell her all the time where he was and what he was doing and who he was with. but Zeb generally would anyway, just to let his mum know that I'll be back at this time, I'm just out with this person. So when Zeb didn't return home, Denise was a little bit concerned, and eventually after about an hour and a half of Zeb not returning home, she actually calls Walmart to say to her, like, no, Zeb left here an hour and a half ago, he should be with you by now. And of course he wasn't, and he's never been seen since. The following afternoon, Denise calls the police and reports Zeb missing. So obviously Denise spends the next couple of days frantic with worry, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the police were doing to look for Zeb in this time. But 2 days after Zeb was last seen, Walmart received a call from someone who was claiming to be Zeb, and this person was saying that he wouldn't be in work today because he was ill. Now luckily the person who answered this phone call in the electronics department was Zeb's manager Patty, and Patty knew Zeb really well and knew that this wasn't Zeb on the other end. She purposely kept this person on the line and asked them questions only Zeb would know the answer to, like what time was your shift today, how many hours are you supposed to be doing, and this person on the other end of the phone just didn't know the answer, so Patty immediately knew that something was really up. Eventually the phone call ends and Patty's curious, so she actually traces the phone call back to like where it came from, and it came from a Volvo plant, and she knew that Zeb would have no reason to be a Volvo plant, but she knew that Robert Owens actually worked there. That was his other job. So Patty alerts Zeb's mum and tells her that somebody's just called in claiming to be Zeb and it definitely wasn't him. And so Denise obviously calls the police. And the police again trace the phone call back to the Volvo plant, and they immediately go to question Robert Owens. And Robert admits that it was him. He says that he was the one who called, but he only called because Zeb had actually called him and asked him to call in sick for him, and he was just doing a favour for a friend. So Robert's obviously a very strange character here, but he's not the only strange character. Police interviewed anyone who was slightly connected to Zeb, including a girl named Misty Taylor. Now, Zeb had recently become romantically interested in Misty, but Misty had a boyfriend called Wesley Smith and they had a child together. Zeb told friends and family that Wesley was actually very abusive towards Misty, and apparently Wesley had threatened Zeb once he found out that Misty and Zeb were talking. Now I'm not sure if Misty returned Zeb's romantic interest here. I suppose we'll never really know, but I do think it's possible that maybe Misty led Zeb on a little bit, because Zeb did have this learning disability which would have made him quite easily led. But then again, why would Misty talk to Zeb when she's got this other boyfriend who is apparently abusive, and you would think that she'd be a bit scared of his reaction if he found out. I do think it was a bit of like an unrequited love situation, like Zeb just had these feelings for Misty which probably weren't returned, but we'll never know. Either way, Zeb was the other man in this particular relationship. Misty and Wesley were together and Zeb was trying to get Misty's attention and affection, but Misty was in a relationship. And Zeb wouldn't hide this very well. Apparently once he turned up at Misty's house and Wesley was there, and this sort of resulted in an argument, or maybe this is when Zeb got threatened. Other times Zeb called Misty but he wouldn't hide his caller ID, and so Wesley would find out that Zeb was calling Misty. And so Wesley didn't like Zeb that much. But that whole relationship between Zeb and Misty is a bit mysterious. I'm not entirely sure what the dynamics were there, so it's really hard to analyse it when you don't really know the details. Police obviously also attempted to trace the page that Zeb had received on the night he disappeared, the page that prompted him to stop at the side of the road and run to a payphone. It actually came from the home of his paternal aunt, a woman called Ina Eustich. Now, Zeb and Ina weren't particularly close, which just makes this even stranger, and they didn't see each other that often, so it was just very odd. And when she was questioned about the page, Ina denied ever sending it. Ina claimed that she wasn't even at home at the time that the page was sent, and that she'd been having dinner with a friend, a woman called Tamara Taylor. Now, strangely enough, Tamara Taylor was actually the mother of Misty Taylor. And apparently Misty and Wesley just happened to be at this dinner with Ina and Tamara as well. Ina later filed a police report saying that her house had been broken into that evening. Now, I couldn't find out exactly when she'd filed the police report, whether it was before or after the police questioned her about this page. But she reported that somebody had broken into her home, nothing had been stolen, and just a few things like photo frames had been moved around, which is again very, very odd. This whole case is just full of really strange little details. But then 4 days after Zeb went missing, so we're now at January 6th, Zeb's mother Denise actually receives a phone call from a colleague. Denise worked at Asheville Hospital where she was a nurse, and she receives a phone call from a co-worker who sort of works in a different department. This co-worker was a former classmate of Zeb and sort of knew everything that was going on. And she says as she was driving to work that day, she actually saw Zeb's car parked in the car park of a nearby barbecue restaurant called the Little Pigs Barbecue, and this restaurant was literally like next door to the hospital, and it was pretty difficult to miss that Zeb's car was there. Denise obviously calls the police again, and when they go to investigate the car, they find a really strange scene. The car's headlights have been left on and the windows were cracked open ever so slightly. On one of the rear windows there was a pair of lips drawn in pink lipstick and an exclamation mark. And there was also a live Labrador puppy found inside the car. A live puppy. Also inside the car they found a hotel key card which the police were completely unable to trace back to any particular hotel. They found a jacket which nobody thinks belongs to Zeb. They also found pool cues which likely were Zeb's. And they found like empty bottles and things like that as well. They collected as much forensic evidence as they could from this car, but it's never led to any new leads. But let's just stop and analyse this whole situation for a little bit, because it is just unlike any other case I've ever heard of. Like, a live puppy was found in the car, the abandoned car of this boy who has now been missing for 4 days. Now, it doesn't seem like the car had been there very long. The headlights were still on, which means that the battery hadn't run flat just yet. And there's also the huge coincidence of it being found in the car park of a restaurant next door to the hotel in which Zeb's mother and his sister actually works as well. Denise always said that she believed that somebody had placed it there on purpose, intending for her to find it. And this suggests that the person who potentially harmed Zeb knew him personally, knew where his mother and sister worked. Now, I couldn't find any information online about the state of the puppy as hard as I looked. It didn't say if the car was covered in dog poo or anything like that, if the puppy was particularly hungry or dehydrated. And so because there's such a lack of evidence about that, I'm going to say that the puppy was probably quite happy in the car, again suggesting that it hadn't been there for that long. To this day, nobody has a clue how the puppy came to be in the car. Obviously, they went around and asked like breeders and kennels and things like that if they'd like recently sold a puppy, and nobody ever had. Obviously, Zeb didn't own a puppy himself, so it wasn't his, and the general consensus that somebody had been driving around in Zeb's car after he disappeared, and this person had somehow come into possession of a puppy. But then again, nobody who knew Zeb, none of his like close friends, had a puppy. I mean, that's something you notice. If somebody has a puppy one day and then doesn't have one the next, you're going to pick up on that. But none of Zeb's friends or anybody who knew him had a puppy that suddenly went missing. So this doesn't like point to anybody. And don't worry, one of the investigators on the case actually ended up adopting the puppy, so the puppy did have a happy ending. The driver's seat of the car also was positioned very, very close to the wheel, way too close for it to have been Zeb who was driving, and probably more about the size of a female. And the fact that there were lips drawn on the car in lipstick as well, again suggests that a female was present, because although it's possible, it's very unlikely that a man is going to be carrying around a pink lipstick. Somebody also called the police to report that they had actually seen Zeb's car being driven around downtown Asheville after he disappeared, and it was being driven by a female. So of course the police spoke to this person and got them to sort of work with an artist to draw up a composite sketch of the female who was driving the car. And of course this composite sketch looked a lot like Misty Taylor. Now, it's worth saying that bar the fact they all knew Zeb, the police have never been able to make any connection between Robert Jason Owens, Misty Taylor, Wesley Smith and Ina Eustich. These people just didn't really know each other. Obviously, Misty, Wesley and Ina did, but none of these people knew Robert. After this, the case just kind of went cold. No new leads came out. Obviously, the police had to move on. Denise has done lots of interviews over the years saying that she still actually believes that Zeb is alive, but there's nothing more than that. But that was until March 16th, 2015, when Robert Owens was actually arrested on suspicion of murder. And it wasn't the murder of Zebb Quinn. He was arrested on suspicion of murder of a woman called Christy Schoen and her husband JT Codd and their unborn child. Now, Christy had actually been on reality TV. She'd been on a show called Food Network Star. and Robert Owens had murdered her. Now, Christy's father actually reported that his daughter was missing when she didn't show up for a visit one day. And so sheriffs show up at her house to do like a welfare check and find that things aren't quite right. Christy lived in Leicester, by the way, so very, very close to Asheville, where Zeb actually was heading to on that night he disappeared to look at new cars. So when the police turn up at the house in Leicester, they notice that the dogs haven't been tended to, haven't been fed in quite a few days. Someone actually later contacts the authorities about 8:30 p.m. that same night, and they reported that they'd seen a man throwing bin bags into a private dumpster nearby. Now, luckily this person did call in and said they'd seen this, because the police go to retrieve these bags, and in them they find items belonging to Christy and JT. And now this man who was throwing the bin bags in there was later identified as Robert Owens. Now, Robert was connected to Christy and JT because he'd actually worked as a contractor for them. No motive has ever been given for these murders, but Robert has admitted that he was the one to kill them. He said he struck and killed JT with his own car on March 12, 2015. And the nature of Christy's murder has actually never been released, so we don't exactly know how she died. On searching Robert's property, they actually found the couple's remains in his stove. And Robert was really forthcoming with details of the murder. He kind of just like told police everything. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, the murder of an unborn child, and breaking and entering, and he was later charged with dismembering a human body. And this obviously led to a huge break in the case of Zebb Quinn, because if Robert is capable of killing Christy and JT, he was most likely capable of killing Zeb as well. I mean, it's too much of a coincidence that the last person to ever see Zeb alive would later be arrested for murder of somebody else. So the case into Zeb's disappearance suddenly had this new lease of life, and on March 30th, 2015, crews with shovels started to search Robert's property. And this came after a tip from one of Robert's family members who said that around the time Zeb died, Robert was actually digging a new fish pond in his garden. And in the search, the crew actually did unearth some fabric, leather materials, and unknown hard fragments. As far as I can see, they've never confirmed what the fragments are. I couldn't find more details about that. And then again, the case goes quiet for a little while. So this was in 2015. Robert enters a guilty plea deal in the murder of Christy and JT, and he gets convicted and he avoids the death penalty. April 27, 2017, he's sentenced to a minimum of 59.5 years and a maximum of 74.5 years in jail with no possibility of parole. And then a couple of months later, on July 10th, 2017, a grand jury returns an indictment charging Robert Owens with first-degree murder in the case of Zebb Quinn. So Robert Owens has been officially charged with murder for Zebb Quinn. And a quote came from the authorities saying, "This indictment is the result of years of investigative work and persistence by detectives of the Asheville Police Department, as well as an ongoing partnership with members of the Quinn family and the Buncombe Country District Attorney's Office." So officially, someone has been charged with Zebb's murder, so this is technically a solved case, but there are still so many unanswered questions. Is Robert's timeline of the night even correct, or did he sort of like make it up? Is he lying? Is he telling the truth? Did he potentially just lose it after Zeb accidentally rear-ended his car and just killed him and bury his body somewhere? How has his body never been found? I mean, it's strange that Robert has said that he got in 2 car accidents that night, but he never filed any reports of either accident, and no garage ever reported fixing his car. So how did his car get fixed? How did Zeb's car end up in the car park of the Little Pigs barbecue restaurant? Where did the puppy come from? Why, whoever did this, did they put a puppy in his car? Was it potentially so the car would be found quicker, so somebody would look into it? I mean, people get really mad at animals being left in cars alone, so did they think this would attract enough attention to get somebody to find the car? But why would they want the car to be found? Why would somebody draw the lipstick? Again, is it just a red herring? Was somebody just trying to draw more attention to the car? Very, very strange. I mean, it just seems like unnecessary potential evidence, especially if whoever did this was involved in his disappearance, which is most likely murder. Why would you want to leave extra evidence? Was there really a female driving his car around town? I mean, how close his seat was found to the steering wheel, and the fact that there was lipstick on the window and a female was seen driving his car would suggest that most likely a female was driving his car. But what does that have to do with Robert Owens killing him? How was Ina Usich, Zeb's aunt, involved in all of this? Was she involved at all? why would she page him that night? That is just so odd. The two weren't close. And if Zeb saw this page, why would he immediately feel the need to go and return a call to his aunt? Why would she report that somebody broke into her property when they didn't take anything? Unless she's trying to hide something and come up with a potential alibi. But even if somebody did break into a house and move things around, why would that person then page her nephew from her house? Although Robert has been charged with this, I personally think that Ina, Misty and Wesley still know something. They're involved somehow, some way. It's just too much of a coincidence for them not to be. I mean, the fact that the three of them were all out for dinner that night just seems like too much of a coincidence. Seems like too much of a perfect alibi. The three of them are interwoven in this story so much that I refuse to believe that this was just some kind of coincidence. But then again, is it also too much of a coincidence that the last person to ever see Zebb Quinn would later go on to become a double murderer? Did they all know each other and have somehow managed to hide this connection for 19 years? But what would Zeb have done to them to make them so angry that they'd want him dead? Zeb was harmless, he was very happy all the time, he didn't have any enemies, like everyone liked Zeb. So what would he do to these people to make them so mad that they'd want to kill him? I mean, did Robert just explode in a fit of rage and accidentally murder him? Or just do it in a moment of temper? I mean, was Misty fed up with his romantic advances? Or was Wesley so angry at Zeb for trying to take Misty away from him? And why would Ina, his own aunt, want to be involved in this? The only person we know had like an actual problem with Zeb, the only person who could potentially be considered some kind of enemy in this, is Wesley Smith, Misty's boyfriend, who saw Zeb as the other man. But that's the only thing I can think of. So yes, this is a solved case. Robert Owens has been charged with Zeb's murder. Potentially the authorities did find more when they dug up his garden than they've ever really said. But there's just still so many unanswered questions. As always, I'd love to hear all of your theories about what you think happened to Zeb down below in the comments. And just before I end this, I want to give a huge shout out to my two highest patrons. Jo Cannon, who is just lovely, she's always supporting me, so thank you so much, Jo, and Claire McHale as well, thank you so much. And all of my other patrons as well, you are all incredible, you're helping me do what I want to do on this platform, so thank you so much. I wouldn't be able to do it without you. If anybody's interested in having a look at my Patreon, it'll be linked in the first line of the description down below. And thank you so much for watching. Bye guys.